Yes, the co-chair bit. I think that's the one that I am slightly worried about today because I have quite a few things on my things to do. The co-chairing is with Dr. Steve Grasby. So if anything goes well, please come to see me. If anything goes wrong, please see Steve. Will you tell him, Kim? Yeah. Anyway, no, it's a pleasure to be here. We're kicking off indeed tonight at 5 p.m. with the World Geothermal Congress with the Icebreaker. I hope to see many of you there as well, but I wish you well today for this exciting workshop. Thanks, Sarah, for the kind introduction. I am not going to put any slides. I see some two magnificent speakers after me who will dive into some of the more nitty-gritty details of why geothermal should be part of a wider system benefits. As IGA, we are part of 110 countries these days that have associated with IGA one way or the other, whether they are established or whether they are emerging. They have a say, a stake, and an interest in geothermal. However, if you really carefully look at their national, let's say, energy plans, not many governments have adequately mapped geothermal as a critical system into their plans. And if you carefully look at, hi Paul, so this is my fellow Dutchman, always late. Oh, we're early. Yes, no, it's good to see you, and thank you for coming all the way to Calgary. Not many countries have adequately mapped. And if you really carefully look at some of the biggest drivers for system change, it comes from governments, which is why I'm very grateful for the IEA to set up these collaboration programs, because only together, only collaboratively, you can change part of the decision making, but also the world at a better place. When it comes down to the energy transition, from my humble perspective, what I've seen over the past years is that there is currently a gigantic shift on what governments want to achieve based on what is driving them. 20 years ago, some of the governments really came together and were very much triggered by climate change, and hence the climate mitigation agenda was set into action. And hence a lot of the, let's say, lobbies and influencing coalitions of actions were formulated around decarbonization and climate change mitigation scenarios, leading all the way to net zero, decarbonization strategies, etc. That climaxed almost, if I may say so, in 2015, when Paris held the COP and an agreement was signed where the world would keep its pathway to at least preferably in 1.50 degrees and preferably below. Well, we're now in 26, and I can honestly say that we're not keeping to that promise. And it's partly to do with because it's bloody difficult to unite the world. I can say that also as IGA and as geothermal, but it is not easy to unite the world. At the same time, there has been some changes because, of course, under that climate change decarbonization strategy, a lot of governments put efforts in electrification, and it made the rise of renewables, specifically solar and wind, of course, phenomenal. And the hundreds of gigawatts electric that are being installed on behalf of the solar and wind industry is, of course, phenomenal. And we are all very grateful for their part of cleaning up our energy mix. However, geothermal is a little bit behind. If you really look at what the deployment, let's say active deployment, the megawatts on the ground have been achieved. Some of the IGA, especially if you are part of your national, let's say, planning, I thank you for providing always the numbers at the World Geothermal Congresses. There will be updates from many countries in the coming days. And as IGA, we always collect that collaboratively and put some, let's say, numbers to stake. And I will not already, let's say, give it away because we have some exciting talks in the coming weeks. But I can tell you that when it comes down to electricity, we're a little bit flatlining. And I can also tell you that when it comes down to the thermal component of geothermal, we're doing extremely well. However, and this is one of the asks that I would have for the IEA as well, if you look at your wider system benefits, are you focusing on just the electricity game, or are you focusing on the thermal component? Because both are equally important for decarbonization, and maybe the thermal component may be even more important than just the electrification. But beside that, what we find, let's say, overall in the priorities for national governments, they are indeed renewables, and they are indeed CO2 reductions, and they are, most of them at least, are not so much prioritizing geothermal as part of achieving those goals. So the challenge, I guess, that we have in front of us, because all these system benefits that Sarah has listed are, of course, true. We are believers, and I think you in the room and also the 1,800 people that will be gathering over the coming days, we all believe in geothermal. But if you really effectively look at what makes geothermal a priority, it comes down, is it bankable? And will it serve the purpose of a cleaner society? And I think if you look at investment, it's all about the LCOE. And whether people would like to frame E towards energy, that's fine with me. But ultimately, if you look at the investment portfolios, the E stands for electricity. Second, if you look at governments, and especially in all their big plans, it is about reducing the tons of CO2. So how do we come as geothermal to be more part of that sort of discussion making in terms of prioritizing those national plans and trickling it down, of course, to regional and municipalities and communities, because that's step one. But at the same time, it's also about framing geothermal indeed and how to measure that framing when it comes down to the qualities and quantities of why geothermal serves a bigger system approach. And then it becomes about grid stabilization, it becomes about jobs, it becomes about evaluating the CO2 emissions if you phase out fossil fuels. The reason why China has 72% of the world's installed capacity for heating and cooling didn't come by accident. It was a deliberate choice by a government to phase out part of the coal consumption. And I guess to inform those governments who may not have, let's say, geothermal as much on their mind as we hope they have, I think your group is going to be extremely important. And my only ask is that it becomes as quantitative as possible, because, and I know there are quite a few of you representing the government, and I guess you know this much more than I do, but if we don't quantify the benefits, if we don't quantify how we measure those benefits, I think we are remaining a very nice community and a very wonderful group of people who are passionate about our resource. But I do think the challenge we have in front of us is that we quantify our resource into a wider system benefit. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, and I appreciate it, and I realise you do need to run off, so when you do have to run off, thank you so much, and hopefully many of you can grab her during probably the rest of the week, maybe. I'm sure you'll be very busy. But yeah, thank you so much for that. I also realised I actually didn't give you an introduction to who I was, so I did forget that. So I'm Dr. Sarah Robinson, and I actually work for the UK government. So I work for the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. I don't actually sit in policy, but I sit between the bridge of policy and evidence. So my job is to provide the best available scientific and engineering evidence for policymakers. And in the UK, geothermal is quite low regarding with regards to where we're looking at our energy generation. But it's becoming increasingly known that for heat for geothermal in the UK is something that could be very prosperous. So this is where we brought this working group together to help actually bring policy to scientific and engineering evidence, and as Marit said, to really try and quantify, because very often I am asked, but how much does that cost? How much will that produce? So if we can really start to bring those wider system benefits into a quantified way, we can really start to communicate those to policymakers. So thank you.
Thank you, and I see you around. I wish you a wonderful day. And yes, quantify.